Morgan.
And good morning. Thanks for joining me this morning for Hotline. We've got a great program lined up and tons of information, so we're just going to jump right in. I'm going to introduce my guests. We're talking about the Northwest Natural Marine Renewable Energy Center, known as NMREC. And with us today is the director of NMREC, Belinda Batten. Good morning, Belinda.
Good morning, Kara. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm so excited to have you in and share this information this morning. We also have with us Bob Etter, who's a local fisherman and also involved in the Fishermen Involved in Natural Energy, or FINE group, and has been working with Wave Energy as well. Good morning, Bob.
Good morning, Kira. And
joining us by phone, we have Dan Hillian. I hope I pronounced that.
Helene.
Sorry, Dan. So good morning, Dan.
Good morning, Kara.
All right. So, Belinda, first of all, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
I'm a professor at Oregon State University in mechanical engineering, and I became the director of NMREC about 3.5 years ago. And in that role, I help the faculty and students at Oregon State with directions around research and development related to marine energy. And one of the things we become highly engaged in is developing test facilities that will help the stakeholders, the fishermen, the developers, the federal agencies understand how wave energy devices operate.
So this is something that OSU has been doing for, almost 10 years now? Is that right, or longer?
Goodness, probably longer. Another professor at Oregon State, Dr. Annette Von Juan in electrical engineering, who I know a lot of the people on the coast know, took up the role of making her mission to help bring marine energy to the Oregon coast. And I think she began that probably more like 15 years ago.
That's wonderful. And Bob, tell us a little bit about you and what you do and your involvement with NMREC.
Well, I'm a career commercial fisherman. Locally, our family owns and operates the fishing vessel Timmy Boy. And for the last 8 years or so, I've been increasingly involved in marine spatial issues. And that has translated into being a member of this committee that you mentioned, which was formed by our county commissioners, Fishermen Involved in Natural Energy, which began when there was a spate of applications in, I think, about 2007 for wave energy projects, and we thought we should respond with the local stakeholders, so the county commissioners provided that. I've also served 5 years on the Oregon Wave Energy Trust Board and been involved in other marine spatial issues, such as community teams for creating marine reserves in our county and the creation of the Territorial Sea Plan.
That's amazing and so important. I don't think that Lincoln County was really prepared, or any areas of Oregon, off the Oregon coast for that matter, when this kind of suddenly hit. I had Commissioner Thompson on Hotline, as you mentioned, several years ago, and he jokingly drew out a map, which I think he still has, that kind of showed all these different areas of what was going to be wind energy and wave energy and all these different things, and the area for fishing was ending up being very small, and he said that's not going to happen and has worked very hard with the groups to make sure that the fishing areas are protected. Marine protected areas were another big issue, as you mentioned, Bob. So we're also going to hear from Dan. Dan, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Hi, yes, I'm the Environmental Compliance Manager with NMREC. I joined NMREC a little over a year ago. I'm really sort of the go-between between the agencies and any developers who may be testing at our facilities and the scientists who are doing monitoring, ensuring that we're in compliance with the regulations, reporting to the agencies, making sure there's clear communication. I'm also increasingly involved in the regulatory process for our new site that we're developing and the operational side of our ocean test facilities.
And there's a lot of agencies that are involved when it comes to the regulatory process, aren't there, Dan?
there are a lot of agencies both at the state level and the federal level, but the nice thing is that we have a very good working relationship with all of them, and because of all the operations that we have going on, we're in regular contact with them, so it makes life a lot easier.
Belinda, tell us a little bit about NEMRIC and what it is and how it got started.
So NEMRIC, the Northwest National Marine Renewable Energy Center, as you mentioned, was one of 3 centers that were started by the U.S. Department of Energy in 2008. And the mission was to understand marine renewable energy, the possible environmental effects, both positive and negative, understand stakeholder concerns, understand how they work technically, how much energy is going to be produced, anything you can think about this industry. That was the task of these centers. And so we partnered with University of Washington. It's a fantastic collaboration. Initially, OSU was solely working on wave, and University of Washington was solely focused on tidal. Mm-hmm. Since that, the lines have blurred a little bit, and they're doing some work on wave, and we work with them collaboratively on some instrumentation, and we're both working on some offshore wind projects. So within this center, we have faculty at OSU, University of Washington, graduate students doing research, working with industry to understand how their devices perform, and we have some test centers. On campus at OSU, we have some scaled wave tank facilities where we can test smaller devices. And then 2 years ago, we tested our first device out in the ocean at half scale. We'd done a very small device several years ago, but that was the one 2 years ago was a company's device. It was a big step forward, and now we're working on other test facilities.
And this type of collaboration is really important to have the testing in place. As you may remember, several years ago when a company called Finavera, I believe it was, came in and said, oh, we're going to put in this great big giant device, and here's where we're going to put it. And I think it was just a few days shy of them actually pulling the device after their test that things didn't go so well. What was learned from that?
That actually predated me as director, and so a lot of the things I hear about it is the historical content. One of the things that I hear over and over again, and I think it's so true, is that the fishermen saw that there was a problem, and they alerted people that there was a problem, and their wisdom was not paid attention to. Is that fair, Bob?
Yeah, Bob, can you talk a little bit about this?
Well, that's accurate. That's accurate, and I think some of the experience that fishermen have with survival at sea of equipment is, should be heeded. And there was an example actually that we were advised that it looked like the thing was sinking. The day before it was supposed to be pulled out, and that was ignored, and it became a very expensive and extended experience when the Finavera device went to the bottom. It was instructive because it was unfortunate, but it showed, yes, this can happen. In fact, we were 0 for 1.
So it demonstrated the need to have something like NEMRIC in place to do this experiment and test these devices first, right?
Yes, and the fishermen in the Lincoln County community have shown a lot of support for testing one off, and support of the research of the knowledge generation with regards to wave energy. Naturally, we have apprehension about big build-outs where we would lose a lot of our fishing grounds. But there's been an outstanding level of cooperation between fishermen and NEMRIC with the Extension Service as kind of an intermediary. So to where there's actually support, and along with the county, the city, and the Port of Newport, the fishing community asked to have this research center. established, because we know it's a good fit for our area. This is we are maturing into a premier marine research community, and I think as a fisherman, it looks to me like the research component of these developments is perhaps the only real economic booster to come in the near term, meaning 5, 10, 15 years anyway. So we think it's a good fit.
And Melinda, tell us a little bit about the Pacific Marine Energy Center and what was involved with that.
So when NEMRC was started, we had several tasks, and a lot of them were research tasks, and one was to develop integrated facilities for testing devices. And as we tested the device north of Yaquina Head 2 years ago, and then began to embark on developing this grid-connected test facility, we realized the testing in and of itself was something that was going to be internationally visible, and that we might want to delineate it under its own name. So together with the University of Washington, we decided that we would brand all of our testing activities PMEC, the Pacific Marine Energy Center. And the reason why we chose that name is right now the gold standard in wave and tidal energy testing is EMEC, the European Marine Energy Center. So we were trying to think globally, internationally, how we do a recognizable brand that would help industry know what we are. So that's what PMEC is. It's the testing side of the NEMRC activities.
Now, there's actually two sites, a north and a south. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the north site was the first site we opened. That's where we tested 2 years ago. And I mentioned Dr. Annette Vanjawan earlier. When Annette started her outreach to the coast about testing devices, my understanding is the communities were very concerned about having a permanent test site and how that might impact ocean use. So Annette's first idea was to put together a mobile ocean test buoy. So you could put a wave energy device in the water, connect it through a cable to our mobile buoy, and test the device as if you were connected to the grid. That's what we did 2 years ago, and it was really a success and very exciting. And that site is now what we call the North Energy Test Site, or NETS.
And that's near Yaquina Head, is that right?
Exactly. It's just north of Yaquina Head, and when we're out there, you could use binoculars and see from Yaquina Head that we're out there. What happened through that is we realized that the mobile ocean test buoy, which we call Ocean Sentinel, is not capable of testing some of the larger devices that people would want to test. The power capacity is the limiter. So we decided that we would talk to U.S. Department of Energy about building a grid-connected test site. And that's what the PMEC SET site is, or the South Energy Test Site. And when we started down that road, we did an extensive feasibility study as to where that facility would go. And we looked up at the North Coast, we looked at Newport, Reedsport, and Coos Bay. It eventually down selected to Newport and Reedsport, and both communities put together proposals to NEMRC as to where they thought the facility should go, how it would really benefit their communities. And the fishermen at Fine were huge in the Newport proposal in terms of identifying the ocean site for us.
And there was also a lot of support from other areas of Lincoln County, like the Port of Toledo, right?
Absolutely. In fact, the Port of Toledo is the home of Ocean Sentinel. It's there when it's not in the water, and we see them continuing to be a big supporter of the industry as we move forward.
That's wonderful. We're going to turn things over to Dan. Dan, tell us a little bit about the licensing process and what you have to go through.
Yeah, it's the site. Our South Energy Test Site is actually going to be in the outer continental shelf, so outside of the territorial sea. So really, it falls under federal jurisdiction, and it's a complicated process. But the two main federal agencies that we deal with, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, or BOEM, and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC. And the two sort of key pieces we need in place before we can even start creating our site, constructing our site, is we need to get a lease from BOEM, which allows us to use the submerged lands, basically the seafloor, in the outer continental shelf. And then we need to get a license from FERC, which actually gives us the ability to operate the facility.
And oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just interestingly for this project, both BOEM and FERC are collaborating together to try and make the process as painless and streamlined as possible.
Now, recently there was BOEM, I think it was, announced that there was no competition. I don't know if I'm saying this right.
no competitive interest.
That would be it. Can you explain what that is?
Yes. BOEM, in their leasing process, they basically create a grid of the outer continental shelf, all these different blocks and sub-blocks. And if you want to use a facility for, say, offshore renewable energy, you need to lease some of these blocks. And one of the things their process wants to find out, and one of the first steps, is you put in a request for this lease, and then they open it up to public comment to allow other commercial operators who may be interested in using that area to let it be known. And basically the finding that BOEM recently came up with was that there was no other competitive interest in the lease area that we were looking at. It doesn't mean we have a lease, but it means that the process that they go through to review our lease and to issue a lease is slightly easier.
Okay, so Dan, what are the next steps, and what is it that takes? So it seems like it would be kind of an easy process. Look out there, okay, nobody else has any problems with this. Here's your permit, go for it. What is it that takes so long with these processes?
Well, part of it is the environmental side. It's important to know what's out there and how things may be affected by what we're planning to do out there, whether the effects are good or bad. And one of the key things is gathering good scientific data so you actually know for sure what is out there, and then once you put something out in the water, if changes happen, you can relate them to what you've been doing. And any type of marine science takes time, and because of seasons and everything else, it's critical that you have, the agencies prefer 2 years worth of data before you can really start doing anything. So that adds a huge amount to the time that it takes.
So is there a projection of time of about when the grid-connected site, the south site, might be able to be up and running and going?
We're hoping to have our leases and licenses in place by late 2016 and be able to go into operation in 2017. So we still have a long way to go in the process.
All right. Thank you, Dan. I appreciate it. Thanks for joining me. We are talking with folks with the Northwest National Marine Renewable Energy Center, NEMRIC, this morning about wave energy and where we're at with processes. And Bob is here. Bob, tell us a little bit about the work collaboration with NEMRIC and OSU with the local fishermen. We touched base on that a little bit earlier, but it's something that really was one of a kind for Oregon and Lincoln County.
I think you're right, Kira. The collaboration that's really been remarkable is that there was good cooperation from the fishing community, and not just the commercial fishing community, but representatives from individual sport fishing and charter also. And there was cooperation in offering up a research side, and I think that's pretty unusual. It's to the fishing activities themselves, any use besides fishing is a loss of real estate. And because our industry is basically hunting, gathering, the word hunting implies a need for space, extensive space. So there is no ideal space, but we reached some consensus on an area that met the parameters needed by NEMRIC as far as depth, bottom type, proximity to port, and and were of relatively lower value to the fishing fleet, and offered up that site. And that siting is in general has been and probably will be a huge struggle between these interests. So, Dan, there really were competitive interests. We just chose to cooperate and promote research in our community.
And can you talk a little bit about the Fine Committee and the importance of that and how it became the leader for the state and other coastal communities?
Well, as I said earlier, the County Commission created Fine Committee as advisors to the county. And as Wave Energy began making application up and down the coast, there were kind of similar committees created. There's one, the FACT Committee of Tillamook County, and then there's something called SOURCE, Southern Oregon Ocean Resources.
Yeah.
Not all of these came through their counties. They were created in different ways and have slightly different roles, but they're all addressing marine spatial issues.
Well, and the fact that fishermen are getting involved and knowing, that the ocean is starting to be used by other entities, wave energy, and wind energy, marine reserves, and things like that. That's something that's also evolved for fishermen, because for a long time it was just, go out on their vessels, they fish, they do their job, they come back, and that's it. And they never really got involved with the political side. Can you talk a little bit about what that's been like?
Well, it's something that I never knew I signed up for. But in the process of adapting, we have to address these things. Yeah, for many years it was really just fishing and marine transportation, and now there are other uses coming. And as difficult as it is sometimes to reconcile with activities like wave energy development, I think in the future they may look like easy neighbors compared to some of the other possibilities, such as renewed interest in minerals and petroleum, such as high seas aquaculture that might end up polluting the gene pool of the wild fish. So I try to keep some perspective on this, and this is kind of a good training for other confrontations that we may have to share use.
Well, and what I find is really fascinating is for a long time it kind of was an us versus them as far as research and things go with the fishermen. And now fishermen are working collaboratively with the researchers and with the scientists to provide some important information, and now it's more of a win-win, wouldn't you say?
That's the way I see it. I can't speak for all of my colleagues, but I think in general that is a change that is happening now, and there's more of an appreciation for the need to make decisions related to fishing and for management and these questions to be made on a scientific basis, and we can contribute to that. And in some cases, fishermen have a lot of experiential knowledge to offer and to help make the research work itself be more efficient.
Belinda, can you talk a little bit about, from your end, what it's been like working with the local fishermen and getting that collaboration and the importance of it?
It's been paramount to our activities. One of the things I didn't say earlier is NMRIC views ourselves as being a neutral voice of science and engineering. We're really trying to understand this potential industry and its effects, and looking at that means we need to be successful in getting devices in the water. And nobody knows better how to operate in the ocean than the fishermen. Nobody knows better whether this anchor is going to be sufficient. Nobody knows better than is this device going to hold up to that crazy big wave that comes in unexpectedly in October. Bob helped us recently looking at a marine survey of where we're going to put our cables, and having his experience of what it's like when you can go out. We think we might be able to go here, let's go check it out. You just can't replace that. And being able to go to find meetings and say, hey guys, these are our plans, and not just telling them our plans, but saying, what do you think about that? What are we missing? That's something you can't pay for, having that relationship.
Right, saying something like, here's what we'd like to do. Give us your input so we can make it better.
Right.
All right, thanks for joining me with Hotline this morning, talking about NEMRIC, National Marine Renewable Energy Center. So let's talk a little bit about, you recently held a meeting beginning of the month, Belinda, with the FERC Regulatory Commission. How did that go, and what were some things that you may have learned from that?
So this was part of the official process we have with FERC. As Dan mentioned earlier, BOEM and FERC are partnering together to work on our lease and our licensing. And through this regulatory process, we will be having a series of public meetings called scoping meetings. And that's one of the things I want to make the audience aware of. We have a website, pmec.us, so pmec.us. And if you want to know the status of the South Energy test site, you can jump on that website and it will alert people to public meetings and when there are comment periods and these kinds of things, really trying to help people stay informed. So one of the things that was a little disappointing at the scoping meeting is we had very few public attendees. And we didn't know whether to interpret that as we didn't get the word out very well, or that we've done such a great job with community outreach and engagement that everybody knows the project and they're confident. That's kind of the idealistic approach. But
I love her optimism.
we don't put a lot of probability on that one. We think it's probably that people didn't know about it. And then also people really are busy in the summer. And we're in such an early stage. If people have gotten that message, they might think, well, okay, we don't need to be involved now. And there will be lots of opportunities for people to comment as we go through the process. And we really do want the community to feel like this is their project. This is not something that OSU and NEMRIC has foisted upon them. And that's one of the things we try to do at every step. So I really do encourage the local community and even listeners out there who are just interested, not necessarily around Newport, to get on that website and see the status and see when there are opportunities for them to engage.
And Dan, anything that you'd like to add about that?
No, as Belinda said, there's going to be lots of times to comment. The website also, one of the features it has, which is useful, is all the official documents to do with the regulatory process for the South Energy test site are all accessible through that website, which saves people having to go to FERC's website and navigate that, and then BOEM's website to navigate that. So that sort of makes life a lot easier. And also, there is a link to sign up to an emailing list, a mail serve. So if people want to get occasional emails telling them when meetings are going to be happening or public comment periods are happening or new documents are released, that's a good way to stay informed.
All right. And let's talk a little bit about, Dan, you're mentioning that one of the important things in the licensing process is doing these marine surveys as well and checking out the local area. Can you tell us what's involved with that?
Yeah, we one of the things we really need, partly to know about the site itself, but also for the cable routes that will run into shore, is what the sort of geological features are, what the seafloor is and what's below the seafloor. And this is particularly important because our cables are going to be buried in the seafloor as they go out until they get right to the site. And critical for that is knowing that there's sand there, where the rocky areas are, and so on. So in June, we had a pretty large marine survey that was conducted, led by Doctors Chris Goldfinger and Claire Ramers from OSU's College of Earth, Ocean and Atmospheric Sciences. And they teamed up with Bob and used his vessel, the Timmy Boy, and his expertise for a lot of the shallow work. And the data are still being analyzed at the moment, but we got some really great high-resolution data that didn't exist for pretty much the area from very close inshore all the way out to the South Energy Test Site, 7 miles offshore. So that's going to be useful for pinpointing where we're going to put facilities, where we're actually going to site our site, and help focus sort of environmental research.
And Belinda, can you talk a little bit about, I know that NEMRIC has already been doing some surveys, and you'll have to forgive me, I can't remember the BOEMIC, or I'm saying it completely wrong, the study of the fish and vertebrates on the
the benthic study.
Benthic, that's it. I knew it began with a B.
Benthic studies.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So another real advantage that NEMRIC has in running this test site operation is that we've got all the experts, the marine experts at the Hatfield Marine Science Center. And so Dr. Sarah Henkel is a benthic ecologist. Benthic means the bottom.
Yes, that's it.
The ocean bottom, yes. And Sarah is NEMRIC's environmental research director, so she coordinates all the folks that we need to work on this project. And Sarah has been funded by BOEM. You heard that acronym before. Mm-hmm. They are the federal guys. And Sarah's done several studies of the benthic ecology up and down the Oregon coast. And we've really been fortunate that some of the work she's done for BOEM under separate funding, we've been able to leverage on this. And one of the things you want to know about the benthic ecology is what's going to happen to those critters. Sarah tells me that's a very technical word. What's going to happen to these critters when we put anchors in and when we put the mooring systems in for these devices? And so we have to, as Dan mentioned, we've got to study this over time. We've got to study it seasonally. Sarah's discovered that some species you only really need to sample once a year to see what's happening with them, and some we need to sample quarterly. So that's one of the examples of environmental studies we've done to get ready. Another is looking at acoustic studies. We need to understand how loud these devices are, and are they under the thresholds that the various environmental acts specify.
And I think one of the things that came up as kind of an issue and concern was, for the whales. And you've been working with Dr. Bruce Mate as well on that?
We've been working with Dr. Bruce Mate to understand where the male migratory paths are. And so, for example, you wouldn't want to be planning to deploy devices when the whales are migrating if they're going through the site. So that's very important to know. Of course, if there's an emergency, one has to take care of it. But then again, if you know the whales are migrating, you'd be ultra specially careful of that. And of course, every time we're operating, we have marine mammal observers as required.
Because we mentioned how important the fishing community is to our local coastal economy, and whale watching is also a huge part of, brings in a lot of tourist activity, and with the charter boats they do the whale watching tours and things like that. So it's good to know that that's also in sight of being aware of that and what's going on with that. Belinda, is there going to be a lot of do you think a lot of use for testing some of these devices? I know that in the European market there's a lot of folks that have lined up and a waiting list. Do you think we'll have that here as well?
I think we will have a fair amount of interest. I've already been contacted by people asking me when we'll be open for business. And one of the things that we're doing that's slightly different is we will have 4 berths at the PMEX set site, and we will have it permitted where a developer could test small arrays. So maybe 3 or 5 devices, which right now there's not the European Marine Energy Center, EMEC, doesn't do that. And there's a test facility with the Marine base in Hawaii, and they don't have array testing. So I think we're going to see people come and test devices here simply because they're interested in finding out the environmental impacts, environmental effects in the Oregon ocean, and then we might see some of these small arrays. And
are there any wave energy devices that are actually, I know there's been several attempts as we've talked about, but has there actually been any in the Pacific Northwest that have actually taken off and started going?
Well, there aren't commercial projects yet, But the device we tested, the WetNZ project 2 years ago, is queued up to test in Hawaii at their grid-connected site. Now, their site is very limited as to what kind of devices can test there, but they're queued up to do that. And then Columbia Power Technologies outside of Corvallis has been moving through their testing protocols and are looking for a place to test. In fact, I believe they would test with us if we were open. There are two other projects that are looking at Camp Rylea off of Warrenton, and those are shallow water projects, so those wouldn't be suitable for testing with PMEC sets. We're going to be a deep water site. So there's several projects that are moving forward. I might call them second generation technologies. I think they've learned a lot from some of the people who have gone before.
All right, we're wrapping up on Hotline this morning. Melinda, another thing that NEMRIC is known for in working with OSU is outreach and education. Can you talk a little bit about that as we're wrapping up?
Yeah, so Katie Jacobson has been amazing helping us with outreach and engagement to the community, and Ruby Moon has joined our project recently and has been taking up the charge of further developing some of our educational materials. And they've done some workshops for teachers, and on September 26th, as part of the Oregon Wave Energy Conference, we're going to have NEMRIC Day. And at NEMRIC Day, Ruby is going to be bringing in a group of teachers, high school teachers around the state, to try and help them understand how wave energy devices operate and how they might bring that curriculum to their students.
That's awesome. And Bob, anything you want to say in wrapping up?
Don't have a particular statement, no, but thanks for being included, and as primary stakeholders, we this is important. It's important to our whole community.
And the FINE meetings are open to the public, right?
Absolutely, third Tuesday.
People want to get more information or see how they can get involved. And Dan, real quick, anything you'd like to add in wrapping up?
No, I'd just like to again promote the website www.pmec.us to keep up to date about where we are with our development of our site.
Perfect. And thank you all so much for coming in, coming over from Corvallis. Bob, I know you've got an incredibly busy day, and I appreciate very much you guys coming in and sharing with us about NEMRIC, and we'll keep following your successes.